Hello, and welcome to The Key, Inside Higher Ed's news and analysis podcast. I'm Sara Custer, editor-in-chief at Inside Higher Ed. If you've been a longtime reader of Inside Higher Ed, or indeed a listener of this podcast, you probably know Doug Lederman, co-founder and editor of Inside Higher Ed. And you probably know by now that he's retiring at the end of the year. For this episode of The Key, I turned the tables on Doug and put him in the interview hot seat. Doug and I have obviously had conversations over the past year about what Inside Higher Ed's future should look like and how our newsroom will evolve in a world post Doug Lederman and post Scott Jaschik, the other editor and co-founder. And as you'll know, to understand the future, you first need to go back and look at the past. In our conversation, Doug talks about what got him interested in journalism in the first place. Spoiler alert, it's related to a drug bust in high school. And then how he found himself suddenly being an entrepreneur after 17 years reporting on higher education. He doesn't sugarcoat it though. There were plenty of hard times in the past 20 years, most notably when Doug lost his first wife to cancer. It wouldn't be a conversation with Doug without some tough love, as he calls it, for higher education, with him pushing and urging colleges and universities to be better. He says Inside Higher Ed is the best thing he's ever done, other than raise his kids. So how could he possibly top that? Well, he gives us a bit of a teaser on what he's thinking about for his next steps, and you'll be glad to know he plans to stick around higher education. So without further ado, here's one editor walking out of the newsroom, talking to another one who's on her way in. Thanks to the Gates Foundation, our sponsors for this episode.
This episode of The Key is brought to you by the Gates Foundation, working to ensure that race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status are no longer predictors of educational success. Learn more about the Foundation's work to improve digital teaching and learning, advance institutional transformation, and more at usprogram.gatesfoundation.org.
Doug Lederman, co-founder and editor of Inside Higher Ed. Hi.
Hi, former editor, I must say.
Well, you've got, I don't know, a few days left still?
Yeah,
5 days?
I guess. But I took editor out of my signature line. I've just been co-founder for the last, couple months. So anyway, all good.
I didn't even catch that. More than 5 days.
Subtle.
Actually. It's about 15 days.
Yeah. Anyway, good to be here.
Yeah, and this is kind of a farewell podcast, a handover podcast. I am
Absolutely.
the new editor-in-chief, your successor, as much as any one person can be your successor. And we're here to just talk about you and learn about Inside Higher Ed and hear about what your next steps are.
My favorite thing, talking about myself.
Well, let's jump right in then. Why don't you start off by telling us about why you wanted to be a journalist?
So I think, like a lot of people, we're drawn to the things we're good at, or at least I'll speak for myself. I'm drawn to, I like doing things that I'm good at. And so everybody in my family is either a doctor or a lawyer. Started failing science. Failing's a strong word. I started not doing well in science classes very early on. So the doctor kind of dropped off as a possibility. And frankly, lawyering never was that exciting to me, although I was supposed to take the SAT one summer and just didn't. But anyway, so I started writing. Writing came easily. So I did that. We liked writing. Journalism, I started definitely early in high school. And I think probably the moment where I maybe knew that this might be something I really wanted to do was when there was a big drug bust at my private high school in Cleveland, a bunch of students on a trip. So I decided to do a survey on drug use at the high school. And the school said, no, we don't want you to do that. And so I figured if they really didn't want me to do that, there was probably a really good reason to want to do it. So I think the sort of anti-authoritarian and kind of, the instinct in me to sort of want to do what people don't want me to do kind of kicked in. So I did that.
So you did the survey.
Yeah,
you did the
survey. And they almost got, I had to do it kind of illicitly. And then we kind of published it. They didn't know we were going to publish it because we had guess maybe kind of sort of told them that we weren't gonna, and then we did. And I got in, it's probably the most trouble I've ever gotten in. But nothing, nothing that derailed my, you know, my life or anything. But
Yeah.
and then so I did do that, and it was interesting, whatever. And then I think the last time, I mean, I did it all through college, and then I had a real setback in professionally. I mean, I got my first job at the New York Times out of school as a copy boy, and I was supposed to be, the way the Times was set up back then, you were supposed to sort of write on the side in addition to your sort of clerical job. Um, and after 2 years, they basically told me I wasn't New York Times material
Oh gosh.
as a reporter. And, that stung.
Of
But I think
course.
it actually helped motivate me. And my next job was at this weird place that I'd barely ever heard of called the Chronicle Higher Education. And from there, like a lot of things in my life, sort of accidentally started on a road to being a higher ed reporter. So
You
anyway,
weren't, so you didn't set out to be a hired reporter. It kind of found you.
kind of, yeah. I mean, I was choosing two job choices I had back after I left the Times were a daily newspaper job in North Carolina and near Wilmington, where I would have fantasized myself being driving a Jeep and having a golden retriever in the back and whatever, covering these three beach towns, and this job at the Chronicle, and two very different paths. I've thought about what would have happened if I'd gone down the other one, but I took this job at the Chronicle in part because as I was job hunting, I met somebody who ended up being my first and now late wife, but who was, and I wasn't sure whether to base my decisions on that relationship since it was so new, but moving to Wilmington almost certainly would have killed it. The Chronicle job was better and more interesting to me, covering college athletics. So, but yeah, one of those road not taken moments, but I'm glad I took the one I did.
Me too.
Yeah.
So you were at the Chronicle for how long? 10 years?
17.
17.
Yeah,
Okay.
17. Yeah,
Okay.
I covered athletics, and then created a special projects beat where we did a bunch of things, sort of, and then took over the government and politics section, which was the biggest section there, covering federal and state government, and then sort of attached my coattails to Scott Jaschik, my colleague there, and he, moved up the ladder there, and we more or less moved up through there together, and he became editor ultimately, and I became managing editor, and we did that until we didn't anymore.
So that's 2004, more or less, when you decided to stop doing that and branch out on your own to start Inside Higher Ed because you felt there was a need for a digital-only publication for higher education.
We loved, I mean, Scott was at the Chronicle even longer than I was. We were a year longer. We left in the middle of 2003. Very mutual decision. We had been pushing and prodding the Chronicle to change, and they kind of didn't want to and kind of thought we were a pain in the ass, which we were. And so we left in mid 2003 and started talking pretty much immediately. A lot of people think we sort of left to start Inside Higher Ed, which isn't really accurate. We left because we ran out of runway at the Chronicle and tried to do a lot of the things we ended up doing at Inside Higher Ed internally within the Chronicle, trying to get the Chronicle to change, be more digital, be less expensive, all sorts of things. But anyway, and then we decided we just believed, in largely the mission that the Chronicle had, but just thought there might be a better way or at least a different way of doing it in the early 21st century. So set about trying to do it. It was not easy. Not everybody necessarily saw the need that we saw. And all we had was sort of three, there were three of us. There was a third co-founder, Kathleen Collins, and we thought it was a great idea, but that's pretty much all we had was
Did you have
good idea.
Did anyone have any sort of business background, entrepreneurial background?
Well, Kathleen was the person who oversaw the Chronicle's job board, which was the biggest revenue source at the Chronicle. And so, she was more or less the sort of business side person, but she'd always worked pretty much within the Chronicle. So none of us were entrepreneurs in the formal sense. And I've always described myself as an accidental entrepreneur because I don't think I was built emotional, physically, but more sort of emotionally to be a risk taker.
Mm.
I used to be kept up at night worrying about whether we were going to be able to A, get it funded, and then B, once we got it funded, pay the bills. And so that I had some serious insomnia for quite a while. But anyway, so we didn't really have. I mean, we learned, but that was part of the problem. We had three experienced people, and knowledgeable people, and what was a pretty good idea, but there were a lot of questions people had about like whether we could do it. So,
Sure.
but we persevered.
And then when did the insomnia stop? Let's say, if it did, or when did you get to a feeling that you like were no longer on shaky ground and
Yeah.
hey, this might not go bust?
Well, the insomnia ebbed thanks to medication. um, but and then, but to more pointedly to your question, I mean, what was really weird is that the Great Recession was actually really good for inside higher ed. We, as coming in as we did, as the upstart, trying to get people's attention, trying to be lower cost, certainly on the reading side, since we didn't charge anything for the content, but even on the job side and some other things, we sort of um, the Great Recession kind of sent a shock through the whole world, but including higher ed, and and it, people got some people started using us like for jobs and for advertising because we were new and less expensive than the Chronicle, and so we grew during the Great Recession, which was if the Great Recession had come a year or two earlier, or if we had started a year or two later, I have a feeling it could have killed us but because we started in 2005 and the Great Recession didn't come till really 2007, late 2007, early 2008. We had established ourselves enough from a readership standpoint that we were on, not necessarily on par with the Chronicle at that point, but we were already a legitimate alternative, and so some business came to us that probably wouldn't necessarily have before the recession because people were reassessing how they did things, and if the Chronicle was charging X, they might have looked at us to charge less for job advertising and things like that. So anyway, I would say, I mean, we became profitable during, I think in 2009 was our first year of profitability.
Wow.
Which again, against all odds in many ways, but I would say, I mean, the going back to what I said before about not necessarily being made for this, I never really stopped worrying. I mean, we got to a point where we worried less and where we weren't up all, I was able to fall asleep and stay asleep, but I just was the responsibility of being of the responsibility for people's work lives and lives.
Sure.
Was a pretty heavy load. Again, I just don't think I was meant to be an entrepreneur. I mean, I'm glad I did it, but just in terms of, I did it out of a desire to do what we do rather than because I wanted to start a thing.
Right. Well, it's turned out well for you.
Yeah, it's worked out. Yeah, it's worked out.
And,
but a lot of things are accidental. I mean, that's how life is. Kind of.
Exactly. And a lot of it is luck as well.
Totally.
With like you say, the timing of the Great Recession. I wonder, now that you are a media mogul, 20 years after the fact, after starting it, I wonder if you think something like Inside Higher Ed could start today, if Scott Jaschik and Doug Lederman could embark on their own and do something similar.
Yeah, well, we sort of always honestly expected that there would be we knew it was important to get established because we figured others would come along, and in certain ways they have. I mean, there are other publications out there. There's a lot more interest in higher education. I think the moment was a lucky one in many ways, or again, sort of fortunate. When we started, we started. We were very early in having a digital only publication. We were trying to get started, and we were talking to we tried to get Inside Higher Ed started through an actual existing publication. We talked to every major publication that has an audience that cares about higher education, The Economist and the New York Times and the Atlantic and the Washington Post and others that had meaningful higher education. We tried to persuade them that starting a higher education vertical would make sense for them, but they were not in a position to be thinking digital only at that point. We were the only publication that we really were able to point to that was sort of similar, that was sort of like a trade publication at that point, was something called Media Bistro, which was a journalism publication, still exists.
Yeah.
But we were before Politico. Politico came not too long after we started, so it fairly quickly became, there were more things like us, but it was definitely a moment, and we were not lucky to get it started, but it wasn't easy. We spent a whole year plus, almost 2 years, really trying to find somebody willing to fund it. And so anyway, but it's so I think there's certainly, the media landscape. It's never been a lot of fun in terms of the business side, and so I think it would be. I hope there will continue to be. The most recent publications that have sort of emerged in and around higher ed are really on the nonprofit side, like Open Campus and Hechinger is more recent. So, I don't think there's a whole lot of people out there looking to fund journalism things sort of financially these days. But I do think there will continue, higher ed continues to be a fertile ground. And so I'm sure there will continue to be people and places aiming to write about it. But it's pretty tough to start things, I would think, these days.
Sure. So. And there have been a few questions about the logo, the orange of Inside Higher Ed. Why did you go with orange?
So it's really funny. So I'm in Cleveland now. We're visiting my family, and we were watching the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns have orange. I went to Princeton, which is orange and black are its colors. So almost everybody thinks that I influenced the decision because I have all this orange in my life. Truth is, no. The design firm that we worked with when we were getting Inside Higher Ed built for the first time, the website, their palette experts said that we needed an upstart color. The Chronicle was very khaki at the time.
Okay.
That was that back when we left the Chronicle had this sort of very sort of staid khaki and blue colors, this sort of beige. And so our advisors of various kinds they said, you gotta hit people. You gotta, so I forget what other colors they presented us with, but orange was the one that that they thought would differentiate us. And, so it's basically that simple. The funniest thing, and I'll keep this brief, but, speaking of the logo, the first, banner across the top of the Inside Higher Ed website, we and the designers settled on this thing that were supposed to look like arches, campus arches.
Okay.
Stanford has these very famous arches, and they look kind of like that. But some of the first people that looked at the website when we put it out there, instead of seeing arches, they saw tombstones. They saw the opposite of, instead of seeing this part,
the upper bit, they saw
exactly. They saw And so like, they're like, why do you have tombstones on your
Oh
website?
no.
And so that was not a great look. So we fairly quickly pivoted away
Not
from
the
that. If you,
cloisters you were hoping for.
no, exactly. And if you go back to the very early websites, which are still visible on the Wayback Machine,
Hmm.
you can see them. I have showed them a few times. So anyway,
Okay,
but
good.
so
Well,
that's the story of the orange. But it's been
okay.
very good. Been very good to us. There's a whole lot of orange in other companies now, like especially in higher ed. Like for a long time we had these great bags that we'd give out at every conference, and anybody would be carrying around an orange bag, and it was great because it was very visible, good visibility for us. And now there's like 5 other companies that have orange.
So we were there
But
first. You're
we were there for
yeah, we
exactly,
were there first.
exactly.
Interesting that it was also like a very much a response to the khaki and
Yeah,
the blue. So
yeah, yeah. Well, listen, a lot of our early stuff was that it was how do we differentiate,
sure.
and we had spent a lot of time trying to make the Chronicle be well known and visible and great, and then we were competing against it. So
So you said that you started out, well, you became a journalist because you weren't going to be a doctor and you didn't really want to be a lawyer, but you
mhm,
liked writing. But
mhm.
over the years you have expanded those skills. So you are doing a lot of public speaking, you do a lot of Inside Higher Ed webcasts, you do the podcast. Is there a specific type of communication that you like now as your skills have expanded over the years?
Well, listen, it all flows from the journalism originally, and from the writing. I mean, that's what um, helped build whatever expertise I have and enabled me to then talk. And I was not, again, I think most of us are not finished products really ever. But like when we started Inside Higher Ed at 40, I was 40 and Scott was a little younger. Um, we had to our journalism was obviously what got us on the map, and it was just putting out high quality content that um, made Inside Higher Ed something people wanted to read. And we were very lucky really early on, pretty within a year after we started, the Spellings Commission under the second Bush administration. No, yes, second Bush administration.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Margaret Spellings started a commission to study higher education. And Scott and I were pretty much more or less the only reporters back then, or maybe we'd hired one or two by then. So I wound up covering the Spellings Commission myself. And it was a huge story. And it wound up, I was sort of the person covering it for the Chronicle and was like one of their good younger reporters. But so my coverage got a lot of attention just because people were really interested in it. It really helped solidify Inside Higher Ed. I mean, Scott was always cranking out amazing journalism. So
Mm-hmm.
it was journalism that founded it, that sort of was the basis for it. But we also knew we needed to be out there being visible. So Scott and I accepted every speaking engagement under the sun. And Scott was a natural speaker, and I had to learn it. I was not sort of a natural. I'm now glib as all get out, but I wasn't that way sort of to begin with. And I had to. There's a video of me on C-SPAN early one Saturday morning fielding calls and just did terribly. Like I was talking about something I didn't really know that much, student loans at the time.
Mm.
And so I had to really work hard at it. But I mean, journalism has changed obviously from when we were getting started and their journalists are pundits in certain ways. And so I've
Sure.
had to do some of that. And I like it perfectly fine. But ultimately, it's about, I mean, to me, I was never a tremendously facile writer. I'm write very clearly, and I'm really good at taking in a lot of information and presenting it clearly. But I'm not the writer who makes your heart sing when as some writers are. So for me, it's really just about helping people understand stuff And that's easiest in writing. And I think, and again, I like some of these other things, but for me, it's always been about the, the text.
Sure.
And I think that still matters for journalists, even in the age of TikTok and Instagram. So.
Yeah. And I think especially for Inside Higher Ed, I think you and Scott's strengths as journalists and talent as journalists is in that news story writing. And I think that's why Inside Higher Ed is in the position that it is right now as the number one source for news in higher education.
That's certainly what we continue to hear is that people, I mean, two or three people said it to me at a conference I was at last week. It's just like, it's still how I start the day to know what might be coming either that day or coming around the corner that's going to either help my institution or bite me in the butt. And that's what people,
The
I
good
think
and the
that's,
bad.
yeah, but I think that's what we continue to do
Mm,
best. And I think we've had an amazing group of reporters and editors over the 20 years and continue to, and that work will continue under yours and Sue Greenberg's and Catherine Knott's and Bob Moser's leadership.
sure. And that is one thing that really attracted me to Inside Higher Ed is just as a journalist myself, the news, the real news hound culture that's here. And I think we've got a great set of journalists
Yep.
in our newsroom right now. And yeah, that is certainly one of my main priorities coming in behind you guys is just news, making sure that we maintain that position for our readers
Yeah.
as the
Yeah.
number one place.
There's never been, I don't think, a more important time. Certainly there has not been a time when higher education has been as vulnerable. And I'm not talking about like closing down vulnerable, but I mean, there's going to be some of that, but I'm talking about vulnerable from its hold on the populace and on the politicians who help fund it. And, there has not been a time when things have been as, and again, just because they're fragile doesn't mean that I think it's going to crumble. I really don't. But it's just in terms of the importance of it and of continuing to explain it, continuing to hold it accountable. And that's the thing. It's both those.
Sure.
Things.
Which I think is what Inside Higher Ed does is be that I say it a critical friend. I've heard you describe it different ways, but kind of explaining it, but then also holding it to account,
Yeah.
the sector.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's journalism. I mean, I think most of us wouldn't be writing about higher education if we didn't think it was important. Most of us don't want to spend our time focused on something that doesn't matter. So a lot of people over the years have said, we have to make clear that we are not sort of the industry, or that we're in the tank for it, or that we're there on behalf of the industry. And some people in higher education tend to think that way and get upset when we do write things that are critical. But I always say I care a lot about it, but I'm going to show honestly my love for higher education in a very different way from the people who work in it, including by holding it accountable and presenting some tough love where necessary.
Right. I want to roll back just a little bit and over the 20 years that you were editing and working at Inside Higher Ed, you had a pretty big upset in your personal life, and you lost your wife, Sandy, about 9 years ago. That must have been, almost 10 years ago. That must have been. Can you just tell us about that and tell us what it was like working through grief?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it'll be 10 years ago in February. So it is it's never not with me in some fashion, but it's looming, that number, which is just a significant number, is coming up. I mean, she had it was amazing actually, the sort of, I had been working in higher education, in and around higher education and at Inside Higher Ed for long enough that, it was a people, some number of people were aware, although I'm still run into plenty of people, especially people who've come into my life and into the Inside Higher Ed universe more recently, who don't know, but it was a big deal at the time. Sandy got liver cancer out of, shouldn't have happened. She had no risk factors, but and it visited on her, and she died within a year. It was 11 months from diagnosis to death, and it destroyed me. I did not function very well during a lot of that period. Um, Trying to take care of my kids' emotional needs. They were teenagers then, late in their teens, and it certainly does what events like that do, which is make you question just about everything, including relevance of work and work-life balance. Before we were using that term every 30 seconds, and it didn't drastically alter how much I worked. I always worked kind of too much, and certainly came to regret that. That was probably my biggest regret when she died, was that she was supposed to be around to be bearing the fruits of my overwork now and into my 70s and stuff, and she didn't get that chance. But and it's not like I dropped everything. As I kept working hard, and maybe too hard, for 10 years, but it definitely changed me. It made me I was much more aware of how fragile life can be, and of trying to not let every little thing rip me up, because I knew what really being ripped up was like.
Right. Right.
But it made me, it weirdly, like, Inside Higher Ed didn't matter certainly any less to me after Sandy died than it did. She had been very involved in helping us, not formally, just in the background, helping me. She was a banker, so she actually had the business. Early on, I was the person who did Inside Higher Ed's books, which, thank God, we're past the point where I think they would be likely to be audited, but it probably wasn't great. But Sandy, the banker, helped me keep the book. So she
Helping
very
you with
much
your homework there.
Well, exactly. But she also was just this was a very when we left the Chronicle, it was very scary because we went without income for a good while, and she is at least partially responsible for Inside Higher Ed's existence. So, but it was a life is life is throws curveballs, and that was a huge one. And um, all you can do is figure out how to keep going. And so I'm uh, proud that I kept going. I'm proud that Inside Higher Ed made it possible for me to. People knew. I mean, if we were able to monitor work productivity back then, I wasn't very productive. I would stare at the computer screen for uh, hours at a time, and nothing would happen. And
Well, I'm
it's
amazed you
weird.
were in front of that computer screen.
I didn't really have. I mean, my kids were off doing their lives
Right.
in college at that point. So, I mean, again, people were incredibly generous to me, but also, there is really you don't really have a choice but to keep putting one foot in front of the other, and it was actually helpful in certain ways. But we have to figure out, we don't deal with grief well in professional settings. We don't. It's really hard for people and almost everybody's got stuff, and
Sure.
we often don't recognize what's going on in people's lives, and people have jobs to do. It's not like we can give everybody a pass all the time. But I do think that figuring out how to help people who've had serious setbacks keep functioning. Workplaces are not always great about that, but the inside higher ed workplace was pretty great.
Okay, so you felt supported, but I mean, I
Totally,
think work can also be a welcome distraction when you're going through those periods. Yeah.
100%. And so, and again, it ultimately, it may lead you to totally change up what you do. But for me, it was just, I love this thing. I'm going to keep doing it. I got to get strong. I got to get stronger and get back to being myself. But it worked.
And it's worth noting that you are remarried to a
And
wonderful woman called Kate. So
yes,
you have found love again in your life.
life has gone. I had a conversation early on with my daughter about the difference between moving on and moving ahead. And those are different things to me. And I have been able to move ahead in my life and, have a happy second marriage. And like I had a happy first marriage. But it never leaves you. My son's getting married next summer, and Sandy will be present in some important ways there. Those are not things that you ever leave behind. So,
Um, just looking forward now, perhaps moving ahead from inside higher ed, not moving on.
right.
You are scheduled to officially, I guess, retire from inside higher ed on December 31st. But as people probably won't be surprised to hear, you've indicated that you're not quite ready for retirement in the most traditional sense of it. But you say you want to go on to do something to help higher ed in some form. And I'm just curious to know what sort of challenges you might be focusing on, or what are the ones that trouble you most that you would like to tackle?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I'm still figuring that out. And it's not real hard to find things to work on, challenges to work on. As I
Right.
said before, this is tough time for this set of institutions, for this ecosystem, as I like to call it. So I think and just a couple of things before I talk about the what. To me, we're at this really interesting moment in society where retirement uh, is a weird concept in a at a point when many people's lives, people are going to be living a decade or more longer. Lifetimes are getting longer. People are living. It's not just people are living longer, but people are generally living healthier longer. The old idea of play till I'm 5 and then I go to school for 15 years and then I work for 30 or 40 years and then I go on a take walks and read books or whatever. Those distinctions are increasingly sort of artificial, and I think that has huge implications for higher education because of the whole movement in toward lifelong learning, which I think people are going to need, and that may also have the effect of diminishing how much it makes sense to think of higher education as something you do for a short time and then stop doing. Some number of people I think are going to fewer number of people are going to go do that big chunk, I think, at the beginning and get a bachelor's degree. But I think there's a huge opportunity for higher ed to figure out how to be, if not the deliverer of lifelong learning, a very significant one. And that's actually one of the things I think I'll end up working on. But basically, the work that I'm picturing doing going forward is helping a bunch of institutions so like my theory of change in higher education is that most change in higher ed, to the extent it happens at the single institution level, or even smaller than that, the department level. And the need for change is more significant than can be accomplished, I think, little snippet by little snippet. And yet it's very difficult to bring about systemic change in this kind of non-system we have where institutions do operate largely independently. So figuring out kind of what kinds of change colleges need to engage in to either survive or to thrive and be their best selves, and how to get them to do that in some sort of quasi collective way. That's where I think the potential opportunity is. And we've seen lots of entities out there that work collectively with institutions, whether it's the Achieving the Dream or the University Innovation Alliance or all sorts of others that try and bring institutions together around common goals. That's kind of the work I want to try and do. And the main focus right now is just figuring out which kinds of partners I want to work with. I want to work with people I like and respect. I want to not lead anything if I can avoid it. Like I'm trying to avoid getting back to the thing where I am up at night worrying whether something's going to make it or not. Like I'm ready to be like a soldier or a participant in a cause and getting stuff done, but without leading or. So I'm in a very luxurious position of being able to kind of choose what kind of work I want to do. And I think you have to acknowledge that that's a luxury because there are plenty of people that don't have a choice or can never stop working. So right. I will be able to stop working at some point, but I'm at my parents' house. My dad worked to 79. I don't know if I need to work or just want to work, but I do like to work, and I'm going to continue figuring out ways to work that both allow me to hopefully keep making a difference, but also I do want to spend more time not working than I have during much of my inside higher ed life, as you are learning yourself.
So, I mean, knowing you, I can't imagine you ever not kind of fretting over whatever you are doing because you care so much about stuff. And I think, not to get too touchy-feely here, but I mean, that is definitely one thing since we've started working together over the past 10 months or so, just that deep compassion and caring that you exude for people is really wonderful to have, especially as a mentor boss kind of thing, I guess. But I also think that's what a lot of people feel from you in general. And part of the reason why I think you've been so successful in Inside Higher Ed is that is something that you and Scott both kind of exuded, and why people became loyal readers of yours, is they could see that you really do care.
I appreciate that. I mean, I like people. I love the mission of Inside Higher Ed. So sort of fostering that and encouraging people to take it seriously and do that important work sort of came easy. But also we've had amazing people come through who want to make a difference and work hard. And so I don't know, it's been, I mean, I'm actually sort of, I'm ready. Managing and leading is hard. And again, you're getting a crash course now, and you've picked up you're off to a great start. But I think it is hard, and it is tiring, and I'm actually sort of ready. I mean, part of the reason things are going in the direction they are because it's time for a new generation of people to sort of point the way. And I'm really proud of the sort of foundation Scott and I and a lot of others over the last 20 years have built. Inside Higher Ed is, well positioned to keep thriving and keep making a difference, but it's going to take great leadership from people like you and the other sort of managers at Inside Higher Ed. And we're gonna. And I think journalism is a team sport, and I think most workplaces are sort of the teams matter, and it's not about sort of individual. I mean, you have to have good leaders, and Scott and I certainly had passion and commitment to it. But we were not we did not stay we were a two-person or a handful of people shop for quite a while, but we've grown. There are dozens and dozens of people who make Inside Higher Ed work, and so I don't know. I'm really proud of kind of what we've done, and I take great pride in the legacy of having created Inside Higher Ed. It's other than having helped create my kids, it's probably the best thing I've ever done. And I will be satisfied with having done that. Again, I want to keep trying to do some other stuff that also makes a difference, but that's my biggest legacy, I think, and I'm proud, very proud of it.
Yeah, as you should be. I mean, it's so incredible what you guys started and what you did. One thing that I have felt, I mean, it's impossible for someone to come in and fill the shoes immediately of you and Scott, and that's certainly a responsibility that I feel heavily, but I'm giving it the old college try. But I'm also, giving myself time. You've got 20 years.
You and I have talked about this. It is, first of all, nobody's gonna work and be committed like a founder. I mean, Scott and I were odd people that and probably not necessarily the healthiest people in terms of how we balanced work and life. And and as you and I have spoken, nobody. It is a these are big jobs and they are hard to do, but the days when I don't know, I think it is it will take time to build the capacity to do everything that that a founder like I used to do, and that's but as I said before in this conversation, and you're off to a great start and you're going to do great work, and I'm couldn't be happier with you in this role. So.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. One thing I have noticed is you seem to know everything and everyone, and maybe that's just coming from my own perspective where I feel like I don't know anything or anyone. But what's left for you? I mean, what is there anything that you still want to learn?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Part of most journalists are endlessly curious. I mean, and when people ask me all the time, what are the traits that you look for in a journalist? And do people need to have expertise in higher education, whatever? Listen, curiosity and an inclination to try to scan. I mean, my view, journalists are guides. People have lots of different terms for them, Sherpas and things like that. But journalists' main role continues to be, even as journalism changes, scanning a landscape of some kind, an industry, in our case, a city, a community, or whatever, and helping the people who are in that or want to understand it and make sense of it, and help and figure out, usually, especially a professional publication like this, again, there's that balancing act between helping people understand what's good about it and also bringing some accountability lens to it. And those things that you're writing about are not static. So every year in higher education, I mean, people love to talk about how higher education doesn't change. It's actually a load of crap. And it actually does change. And now it may not change fast enough to survive or to thrive or to satisfy everybody who wants it to be something it's not, but it does change. And so people have asked me, well, why don't you go do something else? Like go in your next thing. But this enterprise industry, whether you ecosystem, whatever, still matters a lot, and it can be better, and it needs to keep mattering again, even as it changes. So there are all sorts of things that are changing that I'm fascinated by. I'm fascinated by what I think is going to be a real evolution in what the offering of higher education is. And it's not just today's fascination with micro credentials or this or that, but it is, how does this set of institutions, this set of people who work and run and teach at these institutions, how do they evolve to continue, not to just keep the institutions alive, because frankly, if that's all it's about, that's just not that important. It's important to the people at them, but how do colleges and universities and other types of entities continue to help do the things that colleges have historically done, which is help people move and figure out what they want to be when they grow up, and how to be functional members of society. And you can look at the way things are and say a lot of that is still being done, but there's clearly dissatisfaction about how well this set of institutions and our society in general are doing those things. So for me, those remain very important missions. And so if I can spend, another 5 to 10 years in some capacity, figuring out how to help fulfill those missions better, that continues to make me interested and curious and eager to make a difference, just in a different way from how I've been doing it the last 20 years.
Well, I can't promise that I won't be calling you up maybe for some advice. In fact, I've threatened that I still have your phone number. I still know where you live. So I'm not letting you go that easily.
Well, and I am anybody who has known me at Inside Higher Ed knows it's not orange blood, but it's in my blood. And I will be Inside Higher Ed's biggest advocate from a little bit more of a distance, starting January 1st.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure everyone listening this will be relieved to hear that you aren't completely disappearing into the sunset, Homer into the bushes, whatever allegory we're using now. But I'm very pleased to know that you are sticking around and that they will still have you as that caring counselor.
You got it. I will have your back, and I will have our reporters' backs, and I will have higher education's backs, except when it messes up, and then I'll have to say what I think.
Get out your cattle prod.
Exactly.
Doug, thank you so much for this.
Pleasure.
Yeah, it's been really fun.
Yep. Thanks to all of you for listening to The Key over these last few years, and continue to do so under Sarah's tutelage and leadership. So you'll see me around.
Yeah, it's not goodbye, it's see you later.
You got it.